My name is Riley Dawson, and at 34 years old, I thought I understood what sacrifice meant. I thought I understood loyalty, devotion, the kind that pulls you backward even when the rest of your life is insisting you move forward. What I didn't understand was how easily family can take that sacrifice, twist it, and hand it to someone else, as if the blood, sweat, and years you poured into them were nothing more than background noise. For 5 years, every spare dollar I earned went somewhere no one could see, into a mortgage I didn't live under and a house I didn't call home anymore. $680,000, a number so large it carved itself into my habits. Cheap food, cheap clothes, quiet nights working instead of resting. I didn't complain. I didn't demand thanks. I just paid month after month, convinced that one day, when the final payment cleared, something would shift. Maybe my father's shoulders would relax. Maybe my mother would smile in a way she hadn't since my childhood. Maybe, just maybe, someone would look at me and say, "You saved us." Instead, what I got was a phone call. No hello, no small talk, just my father's flat voice cutting through the receiver like a blade. "I know you paid off the mortgage," he said, "all of it. But we've decided to give the house to your brother as his graduation present." I remember freezing, staring at the blank wall in my apartment. For a second, I thought I misheard him, but then he added, almost casually, "And don't come to the party. I don't want your attitude ruining his moment." My attitude? That word punched the air out of my lungs. Dylan, my younger brother, who had coasted through school while I worked double shifts, who never lifted a finger to help with the sinking finances, who always received the best of everything, he was getting the one thing I thought I'd saved for all of us. And I wasn't even allowed in the room. I asked my father if he was serious. He told me to stop making things about money, as if the money wasn't the only reason the house still existed, as if the years I had spent shouldering their responsibility were some kind of selfish act. Then he hung up. For a long moment, I didn't move. The only sound was the faint ticking of my kitchen clock. Then I turned to the one person who knew every payment, every transfer, every sacrifice I had made. I asked them the question that set everything in motion. Do you want to tell them, or should I? Because if my family thought they could erase me from my own story, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The party they wanted to celebrate my brother, it didn't end the way they planned, and someone in that crowd was about to expose a truth my parents never expected to face. Before I go any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what comes next. Because the moment this story reached the graduation party, everything my family tried to hide began to crack in front of everyone. 3 days after my father told me I wasn't welcome, I stood across the street from the house I had spent half a decade saving. It looked staged. String lights wrapped around the porch, cars lined the curb like the whole neighborhood had shown up to worship my brother. A giant banner with his name stretched across the doorway. His future, his accomplishment, his big day. No sign, not even a whisper of the sacrifice that had paid for every board and brick. Inside, laughter spilled through the windows as if joy itself had taken up residence. From the outside, it looked like a celebration. From the inside, it was a lie wrapped in decorations. I didn't walk in yet. I waited. Because someone else knew the truth too. Someone my father couldn't dismiss. Someone he didn't expect to show up with paperwork and memory sharper than his excuses. When Uncle Edward's car pulled up, my pulse steadied. He stepped out, straightened his jacket, and gave me the smallest nod. It was enough. If my parents wanted a party built on a fantasy version of events, then they were about to watch that fantasy burn. Inside, relatives crowded together, raising plates of food and plastic cups. My brother basked in the glow of attention like he'd earned every smile. My mother fluttered around him, her hands moving constantly, adjusting decorations, smoothing tablecloths, shushing anyone who asked about me. My father, though, he was performing. Standing in clusters of family members, he repeated the same polished script over and over. How he fought to keep the house afloat, how he kept the mortgage paid through grit alone, how proud he was to hand the home to Dylan, the future of the family. His voice swelled with pride that didn't belong to him. It wasn't just dishonest, it was theatrical, a show he'd been rehearsing while I'd been dragging his legacy out of a financial grave. I watched relatives nod, impressed by his supposed resilience, unaware that every word he spoke was built on my back. Then Uncle Edward stepped inside. He didn't mingle. He didn't greet people softly. He moved with the kind of calm that carries weight, real weight, the kind that cuts through noise. And when he caught my father boasting again, he stepped forward, lifted his voice just enough to silence the room, and said words that snapped the celebration in half. "Greg, you should probably tell everyone the truth before this toast goes any further." The room froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Every eye turned towards my father, then towards me, and finally towards the man holding the documents that would destroy the version of the story my parents had built. Because once the truth was out in the open, the party didn't just unravel, it detonated. The silence in that living room didn't feel natural. It was too thick, too heavy, like the air itself was bracing for impact. My father's face drained of its practiced confidence the second Uncle Edward spoke. You could practically hear his narrative unraveling, thread by thread. He tried to play it off with a laugh, one of those forced little huffs people use when they're hoping the moment will just disappear. "Edward," he said, waving a hand, "this isn't the time for legal details. We're celebrating my son." But Edward didn't look away. He didn't soften. He didn't step back. He took one measured step forward and held up the folder he brought. "I think," he said calmly, "it is the time, because this house isn't yours to gift, not the way you've been presenting it." A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, others leaned in, and my father's eyes flicked to the papers like they were something toxic. Just then, Dylan swaggered over, wearing that half smirk he'd had since high school, the one that said the world was clay in his hands. "Come on," he said, rolling his eyes. "You're ruining the vibe. Dad handled everything. We're good." "Handled?" Edward repeated slowly, as if testing the taste of the word. "Is that what he told you?" He flipped open the folder. Pages rustled. Cold, legal, undeniable. "This," he said, holding up the first document, "is the agreement your parents signed when the bank was preparing to take this house. And this," he pulled out another sheet, "is Riley's name. The only reason the property survived at all." A murmur spread across the room like a chill. My father stepped forward, voice tightening. "Edward, stop. This is family business." Edward didn't blink. "Exactly, and you've been lying to your family." My mother appeared at my father's side, her fingers gripping his arm, her smile trembling. "Let's just move on," she whispered. But the whisper wasn't quiet enough. People heard, people noticed, and people began connecting dots they'd ignored for years. My father tried again. "You're making a big deal out of nothing. We had an arrangement. Riley just helped." "Helped?" Edward snapped. Not loud, but sharp. "He paid every single installment on the mortgage, every check, every transfer, everything." Gasps this time. A few heads turned toward me, but most turned toward my father. Dylan's smirk vanished. Edward continued, voice steady. "And under the trust I insisted you set up, The trust Riley funded, this house cannot be given away. Not as a gift, not as a surprise, not as a reward for someone else's comfort. My father opened his mouth, but nothing came out. My mother's hand tightened on his arm until her knuckles turned white. The room wasn't celebrating anymore. It was witnessing the cracks, witnessing the deception, witnessing the truth they had never been told. And then Edward delivered the final blow. You didn't save this house, Greg. She did. And if you plan to erase her from that story, you should have reread the paperwork you signed. The crowd didn't explode. They imploded. Conversations broke into arguments, relatives whispered names, accusations, shock. The party had gone from celebration to collapse in seconds. And I hadn't even said a word yet. Because the moment I finally spoke, the entire night took a turn no one was ready for. For the longest time, I stayed quiet. The room churned with questions, disbelief, and the thick tension of people realizing they had been fed a story with entire chapters missing. My father kept trying to patch the holes, throwing out half excuses and strained smiles, but they slid off the growing truth like water off glass. Then someone, my Aunt Marlene, broke the fragile silence. Riley, is it true? Every head turned toward me. My father's head snapped in my direction, his eyes wide, warning, pleading, furious all at once. Dylan hovered behind him, arms folded, jaw tight, like the attention was somehow an inconvenience. I stepped forward. My voice didn't rise. I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I just spoke. Yes, I said. Every payment for 5 years. A ripple of shock rolled through the room. Even people who didn't know me that well stared like they had just realized the quiet one in the background had been holding the ceiling up the entire time. My father rushed to interrupt. It wasn't like that. I turned my eyes toward him, and for the first time in my life, he flinched. It was exactly like that. You were months from losing this house. I stepped in. I paid everything. And you never told anyone, not once. My mother's voice cracked. We didn't want you to feel obligated, honey. I laughed, not cruelly, but tiredly. You let me pour my life into saving this place. You let me work double shifts, skip holidays, miss vacations, go without. All while you let everyone believe Dad was the one fighting to keep the house afloat. I gestured to the walls around us. I didn't want credit. I wanted honesty. Dylan scoffed under his breath, just loud enough. So you helped pay bills. Big deal. Why does everything have to be about you tonight? My uncle turned toward him with a stare that could have cracked the floor. She didn't help pay bills, Dylan. She saved your home, and your parents planned to hand it to you like a gift basket. Dylan's jaw tightened. It's not my fault they chose me. You didn't say no, I said softly. He looked away, but the damage had already been done. People saw it. The entitlement, the ease with which he accepted something he didn't earn. My father tried one more desperate pivot. We wanted to give Dylan a fresh start. He's the younger one. He needs it more. You're independent, Riley. You've always been fine on your own. There it was. The truth behind everything. They didn't think I needed anything, so they convinced themselves I didn't deserve anything. That's the problem, I said. You decided what I needed. You decided what I deserved. You decided my place in this family without ever asking me. The room fell into a deeper silence, one that held discomfort, recognition, and embarrassment for everyone who had bought into my father's narrative. My voice stayed calm, but inside, something long buried and long ignored was finally breaking free. I didn't come here to take anything away. I came because you pushed me out of a house I held up for years, And I came because you thought I'd stay quiet." My father opened his mouth to retaliate, but before he could speak, someone from the back of the room muttered exactly what half the crowd was thinking. "If this is how you treat the child who saved your home, what else have you been hiding?" My mother's face went pale. My father lost the room. And for the first time in my life, I watched their power over the narrative collapse, piece by piece. But the night wasn't over, because after the party fell apart, someone tried to lock me out of the very house I'd spent years saving. The party didn't end, it disintegrated. Conversations that once circled around my brother's bright future now fractured into whispers about deception, favoritism, and the kind of betrayal that stains a family name. My father tried to salvage what he could, pulling relatives aside, insisting everything had been misunderstood, but no one was buying the version anymore. When I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a reset button. For a moment, I just stood there on the porch, watching clusters of relatives leave early with unsettled expressions. A few of them patted my arm or gave me small nods, silent apologies for believing the lie for so long. I didn't blame them. My parents had worked hard to hide the truth. But now that it was out, there was no stuffing it back into a drawer. As the last guests filtered away, I saw my father catch up to Uncle Edward in the driveway. Their voices were low, but even from a distance, I heard the tension, disbelief, anger, embarrassment. Edward didn't yell, he didn't need to. His disappointment alone was loud enough. I waited until the yard emptied, then turned and walked home, quietly, deliberately. I wasn't angry, not yet. What I felt was something colder, sharper, clarity. But clarity doesn't prepare you for what came next. The following afternoon, I returned to the house. I wasn't planning a confrontation. I wasn't there to gloat, demand attention, or force apologies. I simply wanted to talk, to breathe in the space I had fought so long to preserve. Maybe pick up the documents Edward wanted me to keep safe. Maybe hear someone, anyone, acknowledge what had happened the night before. But when I stepped onto the porch and slid my key into the lock, it stopped halfway. A metallic resistance. I frowned and tried again. Nothing. My stomach dropped. One more time, harder. Still nothing. The lock had been changed. Before the realization fully settled, the door cracked open just a sliver, only enough for a narrow slice of Dylan's face to appear. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He didn't open the door wider, didn't step out, didn't offer an explanation. He just stared at my useless key dangling from the lock. "You changed it." It wasn't a question. He shrugged, almost casual. Mom and Dad thought it was best. Best for who? The people who don't pay for the place or the one who did? "Look," he said, still blocking the doorway, "you made things pretty messy last night. They don't want drama, they just want space." Space. That word hit harder than the locked door. I locked me out of my own investment. My name is on the documents. Mine. Dylan's eyes flicked away. Not guilty, not sorry, just uncomfortable, like he was being asked to confront a truth he didn't want to touch. "He should have thought about that before you blew up the party," he muttered. The door began to close. "Dylan." He paused, barely. "I didn't blow anything up. I just stopped pretending." The door clicked shut. And there I was, standing on the porch of a house I had saved, holding a key that no longer fit, understanding with perfect clarity that my family had made their move. They thought shutting me out would silence me. They had no idea what they had just started. Because after that door closed, I stopped waiting for fairness and started preparing for a fight they never expected me to win. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry. Anger would have been easier. What I felt was something deeper, something that had been building for years. The slow dawning realization that my family didn't just overlook me, they counted on me staying quiet. They expected me to swallow insults, to let them rewrite my contributions, to let them redefine my sacrifices as their achievements. And when silence no longer worked in their favor, They replaced the lock. I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by the records I kept tucked away for years. Bank statements, wire transfers, email confirmations, trust agreements. Documents I never meant to use as leverage. I wasn't supposed to have to. But now, they weren't just paperwork. They were proof. My proof. And I was done letting that proof collect dust. I laid each document out like pieces on a chessboard, tracing the timeline, marking which signatures belonged to whom. Every line showed the truth. The house, the mortgage, the trust, it was all tied to me. My parents have forgotten that desperation makes people sign things they later pretend not to understand. But I remembered, and so did the law. By dawn, I had a plan. The next morning, I made an appointment with a real estate and property attorney, Patrick O'Neill. He was known for being calm, methodical, and quietly ruthless when dealing with contested ownership. Exactly what I needed. When I walked into his office, I expected judgment, maybe even skepticism. Instead, he listened. He took in everything, from the unspoken years of favoritism to the financial trail no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. Then he opened the folder. He read silently at first. Then his eyebrows lifted. Then he leaned back in his chair. "Riley," he said slowly, "you didn't just help your parents. Legally speaking, you're the primary stakeholder in this property." I swallowed. "Meaning?" "Meaning your parents can't transfer this house to anyone, not your brother, not a stranger, not even each other, without your explicit consent." He tapped the trust document with 2 fingers. "And they tried anyway." He slid a form across his desk. "This gives us grounds to freeze any attempted transfer." "Freeze it?" I repeated. "Yes, formally and immediately." For the first time since that door slammed in my face, something inside me loosened. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't overreacting. I had been right. Patrick continued, "If your parents changed the locks to keep you out, that's not just unethical. It could be considered a violation, depending on jurisdiction and trust language." He paused, eyes sharpening. "Do you want to enforce your rights?" I didn't need to think. "Yes." He nodded, already reaching for another document. "Then we'll file today." Relief didn't come. What came was resolve, cold, steady, and overdue. Before I left his office, my cousin, Nina, who worked with financial records and had seen more messy property battles than she ever wanted, called me. "You're doing the right thing. And Riley, don't underestimate how far they're willing to go. People who rely on your silence don't react well when you stop being quiet." I knew she was right. The door my brother shut wasn't just the physical barrier. It was my family drawing their line. So I drew mine back. And this time, I wasn't stepping around anyone's comfort. Because once the filings went through, the consequences hit my family harder and faster than any of them were prepared for. The filings went through faster than I expected. Hours, not days. Patrick didn't waste time, and neither did the system. Once the documents were active, I felt something shift, as if the ground beneath this whole mess finally tilted in my direction for the first time. But the shock waves didn't hit me first. They hit my parents, and they hit hard. The next morning, while I was sipping coffee and trying to wrap my head around how quickly everything had escalated, I got a text from Martha, the neighbor who lived across from my parents since I was a kid. She was practically a second set of eyes on the house, the kind of woman who noticed every strange car, every unfamiliar face, every official envelope. Her message read, "You might want to drive by the house. Something's happening." My stomach tightened. I didn't hesitate. When I turned the corner onto my old street, I saw them immediately. 2 city officials climbing the front steps with clipboards and folders tucked under their arms. No balloons, no decorations, no music from the graduation celebration anymore. This time, the porch was crowded with discomfort. My parents opened the door with forced smiles, smiles that shattered when the officials introduced themselves. I couldn't hear every word from across the street, but I didn't have to. The meaning echoed loud and clear in their stiffening postures. Patrick's filings had triggered a formal review. The property was officially flagged. Anything involving a transfer? On hold. Locked. Frozen. No graduation gift, no ownership shuffle, no passing the house off to Dylan like a favor wrapped in a bow. Martha stepped onto her own porch and crossed her arms. "They're telling your parents the trust is active," she murmured when I approached, "that nothing can be transferred until the dispute is resolved." I watched my father's confidence drain the way water drains from a cracked vase. Slow at first, then in a sudden rush. He tried to argue. He always tried to argue, but the officials weren't relatives. They weren't people he could charm or redirect. They were the law, and the law didn't care about his version of the story. At one point, my mother's hand flew to her mouth, and she looked like she might collapse. Dylan came around from the side of the house, confusion written on his face, until one of the officials handed him a notice. He read it. His jaw slackened. His eyes shot to my parents, and then to me. That was the moment he understood this wasn't a family disagreement anymore. This was legal, documented, verified. This was real. For years, my parents had operated on the assumption that I would tolerate anything, that I would let them twist my sacrifices until they resembled their own. But a trust doesn't bend to guilt. A filing doesn't bow to manipulation. A legal freeze doesn't care about who's the favorite child. Reality had finally arrived on their doorstep, and the day wasn't finished with them yet. I didn't go inside. I didn't speak. I didn't interfere. I just watched the consequences unfold with the kind of numb, steady clarity that comes from years of being overlooked. And then, just when the morning couldn't seem to get any worse for my family, I heard the rumble of a tow truck turning onto the street. It headed straight for the driveway, straight for Dylan's car, his leased car, his behind on payments car, the one I had quietly bailed out before, more than once, because no one else would. Not anymore. The truck backed up, the driver stepped out, papers were signed, and in front of early guests, lingering neighbors, and 2 stunned parents, Dylan's car was hooked and lifted off the driveway. He sputtered excuses. "This must be a mistake. I was going to pay," but no one was left to rescue him. For the first time, his consequences stayed with him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood still, absorbing what it looked like when a lifetime of imbalance finally cracked. Because the day wasn't done with them yet. The fallout wasn't over. And I still had one last step to take. Because after the car disappeared down the street, I walked up the driveway with 2 people who would change everything. And this time, I wasn't knocked out of my own story. The tow truck faded down the street, taking more than Dylan's car with it. It dragged away the illusion my parents had been clinging to, that they could keep pretending, keep controlling the narrative, keep reshaping the truth to fit the way they wanted to see themselves. The street fell quiet after that. Too quiet. A few distant relatives who'd lingered for the celebration stepped back, suddenly unsure of whether they should even be there. Martha hovered on her porch, watching every detail the way she had watched our family unravel for years. And me? I finally exhaled, because now it was my turn to walk up that driveway, not as the forgotten child, not as the silent provider, but as the person whose name was legally tied to every inch of that property. I didn't walk alone. Patrick met me at the curb, a thin stack of documents tucked under his arm, his expression firm and unreadable, the look of a man who had done this before and knew exactly what needed to happen. A moment later, Uncle Edward joined us, carrying the original trust folder he'd helped my parents sign years earlier. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. His presence alone was the kind of reassurance I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. Together, the three of us walked up the driveway. The same driveway I paid to save. The same driveway my family tried to bar me from. My parents stood at the doorway, tense and unmoving. My mother's face was blotchy from crying. My father's was stiff with a kind of anger that only grows when a person who's been hiding the truth finally gets dragged into the open. Dylan hovered behind them like a shadow, without his keys, without his car, without the entitlement that usually cushioned every step. Patrick took the lead. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "We need to discuss the terms of the trust." My father's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jump along the side of his face. "This is unnecessary," he snapped. "You're making this into something it doesn't have to be." Patrick didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. He said, "The trust you signed, opening the folder, grants Riley legal authority over any transfer of the property. Since she was locked out, an unauthorized change of occupancy was attempted. We are enforcing her rights." My mother's hand flew to her chest. "Patrick, please, this is our home." "No," Edward said quietly. "It is a home Riley paid for, and a home you tried to give away behind her back." The words hit like a thunderclap. My father took a step forward, pointing a finger at me. "You're punishing us. All of this, locking the house, getting the city involved, calling a lawyer, this is revenge." I met his glare without blinking. "This isn't revenge," I said. "This is the first time I've stopped allowing you to make decisions about my life without me." Patrick continued, unbothered. "You're being given notice. The property is now restricted until the dispute is resolved. A locksmith will be arriving shortly to restore legal access." Dylan's eyes widened. "Wait, you're changing the locks again? On us?" "Yes," Patrick replied. "On anyone who isn't authorized." My father's voice rose. "You can't kick us out of our own house." "It's not your house," Edward said, stepping forward. "Not legally. Not anymore." Silence swallowed the doorway. I took a step closer. Not aggressive, not cruel, just steady. I said, "You locked me out. Now I'm locking out the lies." My father opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of a van pulling up interrupted him. The locksmith, right on time. And for the first time in my life, the doorway to that house didn't close in my face. It opened for me. Because once the locks changed and the house was back under my control, my parents were forced to face a reality they had never prepared for, and neither had I. The locksmith stepped out of his van with a tool bag slung over one shoulder and a clipboard in hand. He didn't know the history. He didn't know the betrayal. He didn't know the years of imbalance carved into that doorway. All he knew was what Patrick had told him. The legal owner was reclaiming access. My father tried to block the locksmith's path with an outstretched arm. "You're not changing anything," he barked. "This is my house, my property. I won't allow it." The locksmith glanced at Patrick. Patrick handed him a copy of the trust and the freeze order. The locksmith read it, looked at my father, looked back at the paperwork. Then he said with absolute neutrality. Sir, the documents say otherwise. My father's face hardened, rage, humiliation, and disbelief all twisting together into something dark. My mother clung to his elbow, her voice cracking. Riley, please, don't do this. This house is all we have. I took a breath, steady, controlled. Mom, it was all I had too, and you gave it away without asking. She trembled, unable to deny it. The locksmith moved past them and knelt by the deadbolt. The metallic clicks echoed through the hallway like gunshots of truth. Undeniable. Irreversible. Dylan paced behind my parents, muttering under his breath, as if trying to make sense of a world suddenly less convenient. My father clasped his hands behind his head, pacing the porch like a man watching his empire collapse. This is ridiculous, he snapped. You're tearing the family apart. I stepped forward. No, I said quietly. The family was tearing for years. You just didn't feel it because I was the one holding it together. Patrick turned to them. You have two options. You cooperate and remove your belongings within the window provided, or we move to formal eviction. Riley is being more generous than the law requires. That word, eviction, sent a visible shock through the doorway. My mother swayed. Dylan's jaw dropped. My father's face went stone cold. You wouldn't, he whispered. I would, because you already did something worse. You pretended I didn't exist. The locksmith stood. New locks are set. I stepped inside. For the first time in years, the house felt unfamiliar, not because of the walls or the furniture, but because of what had happened inside them. The pictures on the shelves told the version of the story my parents wanted the world to believe. Smiling faces, family vacations, a unity that existed on camera but never in reality. As I walked through the living room, I noticed something ironic. They had already moved half of Dylan's things in. Boxes stacked neatly, his clothes draped over furniture, a gaming console plugged into the TV. They had prepared for a future without me in it. Now, they would have to prepare for the opposite. My father followed me inside, voice trembling with anger. Everything we did was for this family. No, I said, turning to face him. Everything I did for this family. You just took credit for it. His mouth opened, ready to fire back. But then something unexpected happened. My mother stepped forward, tears in her eyes, hands trembling. Riley, we never thought you needed anything. That single sentence nearly stopped my pulse, because for the first time, she didn't deny it. She didn't defend it. She didn't sugarcoat it. She admitted the truth, and the truth hurt more than anything she could have lied about. I know, and that's exactly why things are changing now. Behind her, Dylan finally lost his patience. This is insane, he shouted. I'm supposed to live here. You're ruining everything for me. I turned to him slowly. No, Dylan, I'm ruining everything you didn't earn. Silence swallowed the room. For the first time, the house didn't feel like theirs. It felt like mine. But taking control of the house was only the beginning, because what happened in the weeks after sent shockwaves through the rest of the family and forced everyone to confront a truth they had buried for years. The locks clicked into place with a finality that felt almost ceremonial, like the closing of a chapter I'd been trapped in for most of my life. But taking control wasn't the end of the fallout. It was the catalyst. The weeks that followed weren't quiet. They weren't peaceful. They weren't even predictable. What they were was revealing. My parents packed slowly, as if each box forced them to confront a truth they had evaded for years. They didn't move out immediately, not because they had any legal right left, but because denial is a stubborn thing. Somewhere in their minds, they believed I would soften. They believed guilt would force me to backtrack. It didn't. Every day that passed, they grew more unsettled. My father's voice, usually booming and commanding, lost its power. He spoke less. He paced more. He avoided eye contact when he and I crossed paths inside the house. My mother, meanwhile, oscillated between tears and silence. She'd set a bowl on the counter and forget what she meant to do with it. She'd pick up a picture frame and stare at it too long, as if searching for a past that only existed in selective memory. And Dylan? Dylan was furious. He stomped around the house like a storm cloud with legs, muttering under his breath, slamming doors, acting like I personally stolen oxygen from his lungs. Every time he walked past me, he'd glance pointedly at the new locks like they were a personal insult. One evening, as I reviewed paperwork at the dining table, he snapped. "You think anyone's on your side?" he demanded, voice cracking with anger. I didn't look up. Is that what they think? Or is that what you want them to think? His jaw clenched. This house was supposed to be mine. I set down my pen and met his eyes, calmly. Then maybe you should have tried earning it. He scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. You're unbelievable. No, I said quietly. I just finally figured out I don't have to set myself on fire to keep this family warm. He didn't respond. He just stormed off, and that was the last conversation we had for weeks. Word spread through the extended family quickly. I didn't tell them anything myself, but people talk. They always do. Like ripples in a pond, the truth I had tried to protect for years spread through relatives, friends, old neighbors. And with every person who learned what had actually happened, the image of our perfect household cracked further. Some relatives reached out quietly, small messages that said they understood, that they were sorry, that they wished they had noticed sooner. Others stayed silent, unsure which side to stand on. A few called my parents directly, demanding explanations they couldn't provide. The facade was collapsing from every angle. And meanwhile, my father, who once stood tall as the patriarch of the family, was forced into a new and uncomfortable spotlight: accountability. He couldn't tell his version anymore. The documents made sure of that. And the more people asked questions he couldn't answer, the more withdrawn he became. I'd walk into a room and he'd stop talking. Walk into the kitchen and he'd leave without a word. Walk into the hallway and he'd tense like my presence alone was a verdict. Because it was. Not a punishment, not revenge, just reality, finally catching up. And deep down, I knew something was coming. Something bigger. Something inevitable. Because people who build their identity on control don't stay quiet for long. They push back. They break. They lash out. And my father was getting dangerously close to the point where something inside him would snap. Because the day he finally confronted me, really confronted me, was the moment the entire truth about my place in this family came to the surface, and nothing was the same after. It happened late on a Wednesday evening, one of those nights when the house felt too quiet, too tense, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. My parents had been packing in small, reluctant bursts, dragging out the process as if slowness could somehow rewrite the inevitable. I was in the living room, sorting through receipts and old statements, when I heard my father's footsteps behind me. Heavy, purposeful, no hesitation this time. When I turned, he wasn't angry. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't stomping or pacing. He was calm, and that was worse. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, watching me with a look I couldn't read. Not disappointment, not shame, something colder, something like calculation. "Riley," he said quietly, "we need to talk." A simple sentence, but the weight behind it was enough to shift the air in the room. I set the papers down and waited. No interruptions, no softening, no giving him a softer landing. He exhaled slowly. You really want to do this. You really want to take everything we built and burn it down. We, I repeated. We didn't build anything together. I built. You claimed. His jaw tightened, but he pushed on. You're hurting your mother. She's hurting because she's realizing what she let happen. That isn't my doing. He stepped closer, voice dropping even lower. Do you have any idea how hard I've worked? How much pressure I've carried? You think I enjoyed depending on you? Yes, I said, bluntly. I do. He stopped, dead still, because he knew I was right. He had grown used to it, used to my help, my silence, my reliability, used to the comfort of knowing I would carry the consequences he and Dylan kept avoiding. He looked away for a moment, jaw flexing. You're blowing this out of proportion. A house is just a house. No, I said, rising to my feet. A house is protection, stability, a future. And you tried to give mine away. He swallowed hard. We weren't trying to hurt you, but you did, I said, for years. He met my eyes then, really met them, and something unguarded slipped through the cracks. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. A fear he had never allowed himself to face. Fear of losing control, fear of losing the narrative, fear of someone finally seeing him without the carefully constructed mask he wore for the world. Everything I did, he whispered, I did because I thought you were strong enough not to need anything. That's the point, I said softly. You loved the version of me that didn't need anything, the version that made your life easier. He didn't deny it. He couldn't, because that was the truth neither of us had said out loud until that moment. His voice trembled for the first time. Families aren't supposed to fight like this. Families aren't supposed to sacrifice one child to elevate another. Silence fell between us, heavy, raw, unfiltered. Then, in a rare moment of honesty, he finally asked the question he should have asked years ago. What do you want from us, Riley? The answer came naturally. I want you to stop taking advantage of me. I want you to stop pretending I don't matter, and I want my life back. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down at the floor like he was afraid of what he'd see if he looked at me any longer. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as the unshakable pillar of the family, but as a man who realized the foundation he built was crumbling because he never reinforced the part that mattered, me. But even that moment of honesty wasn't the end, because the rest of the family was about to get involved, and their reactions would be louder, harsher, and far more revealing than my father's quiet collapse. Because once the extended family stepped in, the situation exploded, and the truth I'd held for years finally changed the entire family forever. Word travels fast in families like mine, faster than logic, faster than fairness, faster than the truth itself sometimes. But this time, the actual truth had legs, and it sprinted through every branch of our family tree. Within days of my confrontation with my father, the calls began. Not to me, to them, and my parents weren't ready for the kind of questions that came next. The first explosion came in the form of my Aunt Lorraine, my father's older sister, a woman who never sugarcoated anything in her life. She showed up unannounced, storming up the driveway with a fury I'd never seen aimed at anyone except telemarketers and bad restaurant managers. She didn't knock. She barged inside. "Gregory Dawson," she snapped, "what in God's name have you done?" My father, midway through packing a box he'd been pretending not to pack for days, froze solid. My mother hovered behind him like a shadow, wringing her hands. "Aunt Lorraine," I said calmly from across the living room. She turned to me, her face softening for a split second. "Is it true?" she demanded. "Did you pay off this entire mortgage?" "Yes." And he tried to give it away? Yes. She turned back to my father like she was ready to swing a frying pan at him. Have you lost your mind? My father straightened, defensive. This is a family matter. Exactly, which is why I'm here, because family doesn't treat one child like a workhorse and the other like royalty. Dylan scoffed loudly from the hallway, arms folded. Here we go again, everyone taking Riley's side. Aunt Lorraine snapped her gaze toward him so sharply, he actually flinched. You are a grown man who's never worked for anything in your life. Sit down before you embarrass yourself further. Dylan shut up. More relatives followed. Uncles, cousins, even my grandmother, who rarely left her house, sent a string of voicemails demanding explanations. Every one of them wanted to know the same thing. How could you hide something so huge? How could you let Riley do all that alone? What kind of parents behave that way? My mother broke down crying with every new phone call. My father refused to answer most of them, pacing through the house as if sheer movement could defend him from the truth. Some relatives were angry at them, some were disappointed, some were simply stunned. But not a single one of them was angry at me. And that, more than anything, made my parents panic. Because for decades, they'd held on to an illusion that I would always be the problem, that I would always be the difficult one, that I would always be the one who didn't understand family values. Now the entire family finally saw those values for what they really were. Control, favoritism, convenience. At one point, my mother sat on the couch, wiping tears, whispering, "Everyone thinks we're monsters." I sat beside her, not close, but not far. "You're not monsters," I said. "You're people who made selfish choices, and people who avoid consequences eventually run out of places to hide." She cried harder. My father didn't comfort her. He didn't comfort me either. He just stood in the doorway, shoulders slumped, looking like someone who had been dethroned. And then the final blow came, one I didn't deliver. It came from my cousin Nina, the financial analyst who understood every number better than anyone in the entire family. She arrived with a thick folder, her expression unreadable. "Uncle Greg," she said simply, "I reviewed everything, every payment, every transfer, every document. Riley didn't just help." She looked at me, then at them. "She saved you." My father didn't speak. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He just lowered himself into a chair and covered his face with his hands, because the shame he'd been running from had finally caught up. But even that wasn't the end, because the collapse of their reputation was one thing, but the moment they realized their future, their living situation, and their next steps depended entirely on the daughter they'd spent years overlooking, that changed everything. Because the day they finally moved out, and the decision I made about the house afterwards became the final turning point in a story I never thought I'd have the strength to rewrite. Moving day didn't feel like a single moment. It felt like the end of a storm. A long, brutal one. The kind that tears down everything that wasn't built on truth. My parents dragged the process out as long as they could, clinging to every excuse, every delay tactic, every emotional nudge meant to soften me. But the deadline arrived anyway. Cold, solid, impossible to negotiate. They were leaving, and the house, finally, undeniably, was returning to the person who paid for it. That morning, the air was sharp with tension. Boxes lined the hallway like tombstones of old habits. My father kept his eyes down while he carried things out, each step heavy with a mix of anger and shame he couldn't hide anymore. He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He didn't even blame me. He just existed in the quiet, something I had never seen from him. My mother moved slower. Every item she touched seemed to trigger a memory she wasn't ready to face. The faded quilt from my childhood, the chipped ceramic dish she always used for holidays, the photos lining the stairs, pictures of a family pretending to be whole. She paused at one of them, the three of us smiling on the front lawn, the house bright behind us. I remembered that day vividly, not because it was happy, but because it was the day I learned to stay out of the frame unless someone asked. Now, she set the frame down and whispered, "I never thought it would end like this." I didn't say what I wanted to say. You chose the ending the moment you chose to erase me. Instead, I said nothing. Words wouldn't change anything now. Actions had already spoken louder. Dylan loaded the last of his things into a borrowed pickup truck. His expression was sour, resentful, like he'd been personally robbed of a destiny that was never his. He slammed the tailgate shut and stalked toward me. "You really think you won?" he spat. I didn't move. This wasn't a competition. He scoffed. "Then how does it feel like you're enjoying this?" "I'm not," I said. "I'm relieved. There's a difference." He shook his head, disbelief twisting into something like hatred. "You ruined everything." I met his glare calmly. "No, Dylan. Choices have consequences. For once, yours landed on you." He had no comeback. Just silence, and the sound of a truck engine clicking as it cooled. When everything was loaded, when the last box was gone, when the final door closed behind them, something inside the house shifted. The air felt lighter. The walls no longer hummed with resentment. The tension that had once lived in every corner evaporated like fog in sunlight. But the moment that truly hit me was when Patrick and Edward arrived in the driveway, and I realized I didn't have to face what came next alone. We walked through the house together, taking stock of the work that needed to be done. Repairs, updates, decisions. For the first time, those decisions belonged to me. "What do you want to do with it?" Patrick asked. A simple question, a massive one. I walked to the window overlooking the street, the same window that I'd looked out of thousands of times as a kid, wondering when life would finally feel like mine. "What serves my life best?" I murmured. Because that was the question I'd avoided for years. The question I had always pushed aside for someone else's comfort. But no more. I, finally, had an answer. And it would change everything. Because in the end, what I chose to do at the house wasn't revenge. It was freedom. And the final decision closed the door on my past and opened a brand new one for my future. I stood in the living room, the same living room where my father once gave speeches about legacy and family values, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Silence. Real silence. Not the kind filled with tension or walking on eggshells. Not the kind where I waited for the next demand, the next guilt trip, the next rewrite of reality. This silence belonged to me. For the first time, the house felt like what it should have been all along. Mine. Not a burden, not a battlefield, not a symbol of favoritism. Just mine. Patrick walked beside me as we moved room to room, clipboard in hand. He said, "Structural integrity looks good. Some overdue repairs, cosmetic updates. The property has a lot of potential." Potential. A word I had never been allowed to apply to myself before.
It always belonged to Dylan, according to my parents. He was the one with the bright future. I was the one who didn't need anything. But now, potential lived in these walls. Edward paused in the doorway, watching me carefully. Riley, don't make this about proving anything to them. Make it about building something for you. That struck deeper than I expected, because for so long, my entire existence revolved around preventing disaster, patching financial wounds, smoothing emotional fractures, sacrificing personal dreams without even realizing it. I wasn't living, I was maintaining. Now, maintenance wasn't enough. I wanted a life. I walked into the kitchen, the most familiar room from my childhood, the place where I learned to cook, where I sat with homework while my mother prepared dinner, where I listened to my father brag about Dylan's achievements as if they were epic milestones. The countertops were scratched. The cabinets needed updating. The faucet dripped a slow, steady beat. It wasn't perfect. Neither was I. But both could be rebuilt. I turned to Patrick. "I'm not selling it," I said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Then what would you like to do?" I took a deep breath. "I want to turn it into something that gives back what I never got. Stability, safety, a place where someone can start fresh without being taken advantage of." Edward nodded, understanding before I fully explained. "You want to rent it?" he asked. "Not just rent it. I want to make it a home for someone who needs one. Someone like the version of me who thought she had to carry everything alone. Because revenge wouldn't heal anything. Ownership wouldn't erase the pain. But transforming the house, reclaiming it on my terms, using it to build a life instead of repairing someone else's mistakes, that was freedom." Patrick smiled. "Then let's make it official." Weeks later, after all the paperwork settled and the dust of drama finally faded, I sat in the front yard. My front yard. Watching contractors haul in supplies for renovations. Fresh paint, new locks, new life. The house wasn't a symbol of my family anymore. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a battleground. It was a beginning. My beginning. As I watched the workers unload tools, my phone buzzed. A message from a relative, one of the few who'd supported me through everything. "Proud of you, Riley. You finally chose yourself." And for the first time, I believed it. I wasn't the invisible one. I wasn't the quiet one. I wasn't the forgotten one. I was the one who rebuilt her life from the ground up, starting with the house they tried to take away.